The intention of this paper is neither to analyze the details of the rescue nor the reasons leading to a plane pilot of the Chilean Navy to risk his life in the midst of the crude winter of 1916. Rather, is to analyze why Chilean elites took so long to consider Pardo as a national hero. To understand this process of slow reassessment of the figure of Pardo, we will use the Stephanie Brzezinski thesis put forward in the James Caird Journal in October 2008. The thesis sustains that appreciation by a society of a particular hero evolves when the cultural climate and values of this society change.
This study analyzed how the figure of Pardo went unnoticed for so long, overshadowed by the dazzling figure of Shackleton. It was decades after the rescue that Pardo began to be recognized for his quotation, audacious and masterly deed, and heroic concept of solidarity.
In August 1916, maritime communications were complicated, and the southernmost part of the world seemed almost uncoupled from the rest, not only due to the commotions of the Great War, but also on account of that especially raw Ostrosano. Furthermore, it is understandable that in the British sphere, not everyone agreed to holding a major Antarctic voyage, as intended by Sir Ernest Shackleton, since it was seen as a waste of forces and men at a time when Great Britain needed them. In this context, aggravated by the natural restrictions to communications proper to wartime, it was understandable that nothing was known about these British explorers, isolated at the edge of the world, and that were desperately trying to return to civilization.
Prior to the rescue of the castaway, 3 attempts had been made to reach Elephant Island. The first was made from Port Stanley, and for this Shackleton rented and equipped a small Norwegian steamer whaler called Southern Sky. It should be recognized that at the time, the inhabitant of Falkland Island seems to care one scrap. Not the flag was flown, and no one seems to care a cuss about the rescue, perhaps because the Falklanders thought it was more important to not distract forces from the war. Then, the Uruguayan government placed at Shackleton's disposal a small fishing trawler of not quite 80 tons named Instituto de Pesca Número 1. She waited anchor from Port Stanley and headed south. 20 miles from her destination, the iceberg was like an unsurmountable wall, so they were forced to return to the Falklands.
At that time, Shackleton had sent 3 of his crew members to Europe to inform the shipwreck and rescue attempts, but there was not much the Europeans could do to help, given the war and the geographical distance to where the castaways were located. Therefore, it is not surprising that King George V replied with British phlegm, "Delighted to have arrived safe and sound in the Falkland Islands. I hope your comrades on Elephant Island will soon be rescued." The need for help was learned in Punta Arenas in late June 1916, when Shackleton arrived to muster help. With the assistance of the British Association of Magallanes, the schooner Emma was contracted. She left Punta Arenas initially escorted and towed by the Yelcho in order to conserve fuel and increase the range of the Emma itself. But she couldn't avoid some collisions with icebergs and had to put an end to her attempt. At that time, second pilot Pardo was a seaman who well knew of the difficulties implied by making a new attempt to reach Elephant Island. He knew of the capacities of the cutter. He had spoken long with Shackleton and his men, and had also towed the schooner Emma as far as open sea and brought her back quite damaged to Punta Arenas. All this adds to the value of his decision to volunteer to command the Yelcho and attempt a new and quick rescue of the castaways. the winter of 1916, there were only two Coast Guard cutters at the Magallanes naval base, the Yáñez and the Yelcho. Both were commanded by merchant pilots and were used to supply southern lighthouses. These vessels were considered as totally unsuitable for winter conditions. However, the naval authorities decided in favor of the Yelcho. She had been built in Glasgow in 1906, had a gross weight of 467 tons and an 11-knot walk. Unfortunately, she was made of iron, had no heating, no electrical lighting, no radio, no false bottom, and low bulwarks. It's interesting to note that Shackleton himself was convinced another type of ship was needed to attempt the rescue and had publicly said that the rescue can only be done with a wooden steam vessel or an icebreaker. Despite everything, the Yelcho was expected to cross Drake's Passage and navigate the 500 nautical miles from the end of the Beagle Channel to Elephant Island. In midwinter, when sea and wind conditions are typically intolerable and extremely severe. Considering what had happened in previous attempts and how inappropriate the vessel was, the Naval Post headquarters decided to call for volunteers. The single aspect in favor of the new attempt was the experience of the merchant pilot, who would be in charge of the Yelcho and whose skills were well recognized by the Chilean authorities, as well as the British expeditioners. Given the dire situation of the castaways on Elephant Island, by now practically without food, the Yelcho departed on 25th August and refilled its coal bunkers in Picton Island. As often happens, the weather soon worsened and her walk slowed to 3 knots. Despite inconveniences, she arrived at Elephant Island on 30th August, deciding to camp at 1 p.m. The rest seemed simple. Within the hour and with 2 longboat trips, all Shackleton's crew were on board, showing their appreciation with vivas and hurrahs to Pardo and the Chilean Navy and the government. Despite all the difficulties in this first official Chilean expedition to the Antarctic, the Yelcho was able to bring back the castaways not only as far as Punta Arenas, but also further north to Valparaiso, from where the British expeditioners were able to personally express their gratitude to the naval authorities and the President of the Republic for the assistance given.
Luis Alberto Pardo Villalón was born in Santiago, Chile, in late 1882. He came from a family of military men and, at the age of 16, joined the Merchant Marine. Graduating in June 1903, was promoted to second pilot in 1910 and then posted to the Magallanes Naval Base, which is why he spent most of his professional life in the extreme south of Chile. He married Laura Ruiz Gaspar and fathered 4 children. It should be said that the Chilean Navy responded quickly to the Shackleton's plea for help. Nevertheless, there were 2 difficulties. The available vessels, as already mentioned, were inappropriate for the mission, and at the time, the Yelcho lack of a commander. In fact, in early August 1916, Pardo was not the commander of the Yelcho, but of another cutter, the Yáñez, and strictly speaking, it should not have fallen to Pardo to rescue the British. Nevertheless, and as indicated in a confidential communication, the then commander of the Yelcho was undergoing all sorts of issues and submitting apologies, health included, in order to avoid the trip. Given the urgency of the mission, the volunteer pilot was quickly appointed commander of the Yelcho. He chose his crew that had mostly served under him and set the course to be taken. He led the rescue at the age of 34, retired from the Navy 3 years later in 1919, having rejected the gift of £25,000 offered by the British government. It is interesting to point out that the pilot Pardo always tried to minimize the deed carried out, focusing on its humanitarian purpose, adding that the glory in the action belonged to the crew whose enthusiasm and zeal were praiseworthy. However, he also felt a strong need to go and save the human life, as in the Masonic thinking, which both Pardo and Shackleton shared.
After the euphoria of the first few days, the figure of Pilot Pardo began to fade in public opinion. He made no standing statements and did not share details of the difficult navigation performed, reiterating that he had merely done his duty as a seaman and as a Chilean. That is why there are only short and deep-felt phrases related to Pardo in the narratives of that time. Foreign newspapers, now in Chile, have referred only on 3 occasions to the Trans-Antarctic expedition and the fate of its crew. The first time, in February 1916, highlighted the inconveniences faced by Shackleton. The second was in June, when Shackleton sent complete information about the sorrows experienced and reported on the failure of the Uruguayan attempt. The third occasion was, obviously, when Pardo rescued the 22 castaways from Elephant Island. The Boston Globe mentioned the Yelcho steamer had been placed at Shackleton's service, but was commanded by Pilot Pardo, whereas the Washington Post clearly indicated the highest compliments are paid to Captain Pardo of the Yelcho, his skillful navigation being considered responsible for the ship's escape from icebergs and other Antarctic dangers. This same paper published a statement by the British expeditioner recognizing the Chilean government very generously placed at my disposal the steamer Yelcho, commanded by Pardo. The steamer was manned and equipped at the expense of the Chilean government. Whereas the New York Times says nothing about Pardo in its articles and focuses only on details of the rescue. It is striking that despite Shackleton and the papers initially recognized the deed by Pardo, later their biographers and elites forgot the difficult rescue operation and who had carried it out. Who really showed the relevance of what Pardo did was the then Senator Ezequiel González Madariaga, who in 1966 paid tribute to the Chilean pilot before the Chilean Senate on occasion of the 50th anniversary since the rescue, and which was previously covered in the mass media. Nevertheless, the topic was once again soon forgotten. It was only after 2002 that the figure of Pardo appeared more strongly, both in the works of Alfonso Filippi and Elcio Cárcamo, as well as articles published in the Chilean Antarctic Bulletin. But near the centennial of the rescue, there was renewed appreciation of Pilot Pardo. It should be mentioned that there was one sector of Chilean society that constantly appreciated the figure of Pardo and felt a strong tie with the hero. This was the more modest sector of Chilean society, who never forgot Pardo's fate. To prove this, it is sufficient to check the written press in all the towns and cities touched by the cutter on its journey north after the rescue. This shows the great rejoicing among people awakened by the courageous deed by the modest Pilot Pardo on board the inappropriate Yelcho. That is why demonstrations by the people were never missing at any of the cities and towns where the vessel anchored. In Concepcion, for example, people's fervor was comparable to the celebrations typical of a national holiday. And among the attendants, there is mention of worker associations, veterans, Boy Scouts, school children, youth committees, the lifeguards associations, tugs, steam vessels, and fishing boats that escorted the Yelcho at each port where they stopped on their journey to Valparaíso. The important El Mercurio paper in Valparaíso highlighted that the hurrahs among seamen to the Yelcho were no matter of ordinance, but spontaneous demonstrations. These demonstrations were described as of the people, since the crowds, with their marvelous intuition, captured the skill and courage of a modest captain of a cutter, and that, to everyone's astonishment, scaled the step to glory.
Possibly Pardo's feat was always appreciated, although the more learned sectors took time to fully appreciate the impact at world level and its transcendence as an Antarctic country. Today, many streets throughout the country carry the name Luis Pardo Villalón or simply Piloto Pardo, whereas others carry the name of Gelcho. The city of Valparaiso rendered tribute to Pardo at a time when the pilot was still alive. So, in mid of 1927, its city hall changed the name of Capilla Street, where Pardo's family home was located, for Gelcho. This initiative had been promoted by the very people of the city. There are also various school and professional institutes whose name remember the Antarctic hero throughout the nation. Despite this, there are not many public monuments commemorating Pardo and his deed. There is a bust of Pardo on Elephant Island, another at the Arturo Prat Naval Base, and a similar one can be found at Prat Pier in Valparaiso. The most impressive one is the recently inaugurated monument located at the Seafront Avenue in Punta Arenas, and which includes a statue of Pardo and the original prow of the Gelcho, which for many years was in Puerto Williams. This monument was an aspiration of the people for decades, testified by the written press and the published academic studies.
In the academic field, and for many years, Pardo's deed did not spark much interest. However, the commemoration of the centennial of the Antarctic rescue helped the rediscovery of this hero, motivating abundant historical and literary research. Something similar happened in the world of arts, and particularly audiovisual art, where the documentaries by Sebastián Domínguez, Jorge Grés, and Tebo Díaz stand out, and the rescue has also been commemorated by the Magellan electronic band Lluvia Ácida. Contrary to other national heroes, the memory of Luis Pardo Villalón and his Antarctic deed has been preserved not so much by military organizations, but by civilian institutions, mostly linked to maritime port activities. The continued presence of the figure of Pardo in people's imagery shows the validity of certain values that, being applicable to situations of war, may also be applicable to situations where peace prevails. A plain, discreet hero, capable of going all out for others in the honor of his country, is appreciated by everyone, especially if all the heroism displayed would appear to be inappropriately appreciated or even forgotten by the very institution to which Pardo belonged. Nevertheless, the trend in the image of this hero in otherwise sectors of Chilean society may only be explained in that Pardo's feat represent values highly appreciated by today's society, such as the value of human life, humanitarianism, and solidarity. All of this without considering what the progress of Pardo has implied for Chilean Antarctic history.